Welcome back, everyone. This is going to be my larger House of the Dragon review video. I was able to go to the premiere a little while ago, and they're finally letting us post more complete reviews, talking about more specific things. It was so great to finally go back to Westeros. We've known about this for a long time coming, so I'll explain what's going on with the show compared to Game of Thrones, the main show, and how they've upgraded a lot of aspects of it just in general. I will be doing videos for all the episodes when it premieres, just like I did for the main series, so be sure to subscribe to get them all. Episode 1 is releasing this weekend as of the day I'm posting this video, so congratulations everyone, you made it. I used to use Longclaw in all my Game of Thrones episode videos, and I did order a new version of Blackfire. You actually see King Viserys I Targaryen holding Blackfire during the episodes because it's still around during this part of the timeline. It doesn't get lost till later. I don't know when that sword is supposed to arrive in the mail, so I'll probably just use a Longclaw until we get it. There are Starks on the show, it's just a different group of Starks because it's earlier in the timeline. The show does jump around a little in the timeline. They're way more comfortable with jumping in the timeline than they were during the original series. But the main plot picks up 187 years before the events of Game of Thrones Season 1. There's like a quick time jump to before that, to the Great Council of 101 AC, to kind of explain how things get to where they are at the beginning of the main plot. I did also like a lot of the references that they included to the main series, like there are direct references to Daenerys Targaryen, The Long Night, White Walkers, A Song of Ice and Fire just in general, just to help place you in the timeline, like this is when this is happening, and this is when that other stuff is going to be happening eventually. They actually start the episode with like a little bit of hand-holding for people that are brand new to A Song of Ice and Fire just in general, so if you didn't read the books, or if you're coming to this series fresh completely, like you didn't watch the original Game of Thrones episodes, you will be able to understand what's going on pretty quickly. And as someone who spent a lot of time going over those original Game of Thrones episodes, reading all the books, I even read the Fire and Blood book that this series is adapted from, I didn't think they went overboard with the hand-holding. They didn't over-explain the show inside the show. That's supposed to be my job. Some of the references are almost fourth wall breaking too, like you'll be pointing at the screen a couple times going, oh my god, they said the thing. But they kind of did that a little bit during the original series too, where like someone literally in the episodes would say, A Song of Ice and Fire. So because this is like literally the first episode, there's a little bit of that going on during episode 1. But just like the original Game of Thrones episode 1, House of the Dragon episode 1 is largely meant to reintroduce you to Westeros, into all these characters, do all this table setting to kind of set up what's going on, what the big conflicts are, and all the bigger stuff that they plan on paying off in the later seasons. Like all the major houses that you remember from Game of Thrones are still here, but because the events of the series take place so far in the past and the events that they cover are so different, the show largely focuses on a lot of houses that you didn't see a ton of during the main show. But like some of the new houses they introduced, like House Valerion and House Hightower, were still around during the events of Game of Thrones on the main show. It's just that during the events of that series, they chose not to focus on those houses, so you don't hear about them. When they were actually writing the show, George R. R. Martin actually worked on the scripts with them, helped advise them, because even though they are adapting the Fire and Blood book, it's basically like a much smaller amount of material that they're adapting than they were adapting for A Song of Ice and Fire in the Game of Thrones series. The story is mostly based on the Fire and Blood book, which is basically like a history book written as a history book. It's not written as a novel like the Song of Ice and Fire novels, it's written like an actual history book, just about the Targaryen family and the things that happened to them during different periods in history. But one of the other differences from the main A Song of Ice and Fire novels is that it's not written in first-person perspective, it's written by a third party, or a couple of third parties, that are trying to remember things that happen, so they wind up getting a lot of things wrong or incomplete, and it winds up being a very subjective tale about this family during these periods in history. Whereas during the main Song of Ice and Fire novels like Game of Thrones, Storm of Swords, Clash of Kings, each of the chapters is written in first-person perspective, so you're getting way more of what the characters are actually thinking and feeling as things are happening to them. So what they said they aim to do in this new series is give you that more objective view that you got during the A Song of Ice and Fire novels, because the Fire and Blood book is written in a third-person perspective and gets a lot of these events wrong. So they're taking like an old maester's remembrance of what happened and giving you more of that objective A Song of Ice and Fire treatment where you get more of what each of the characters is thinking and feeling during all these events. I think during Fire and Blood, there's like an old maester and like a court jester that wind up telling most of the story during that. George R. R. Martin wrote it this way on purpose, so the show is just trying to fill in a lot of those gaps. And if it wasn't clear, this actually started life as George R. R. Martin's show, like he's the person who developed it. He hired the showrunner before HBO ever learned about the show. They worked on it for a while, then he brought it to HBO and said, hey, make this show. So he brought the showrunner to HBO themselves, and Ryan Condal is the person who does most of the writing. Miguel Sapochnik, the other showrunner you remember, was the director of some of the best episodes of Game of Thrones. He's mostly focused with like the practical aspects of making the show and just the way that they actually film it. He did Hardhome, Battle of the Bastards, The Winds of Winter, but throughout all of it, George R. R. Martin was helping make a lot of decisions about what they did with the actual show. So he has way more control over this show and the other spin-offs that they plan on doing, the other prequels they plan on doing, than he did during the main show. So this is very much George R. R. Martin's show in the way that the main show wasn't. One of the biggest changes, though, is introducing you to the traditional House Targaryen as you would think of the other great houses of Westeros. Like on the main show, there were only a couple living Targaryens at the time, Jon Snow, Secret Targaryen as well. On this show, there are literally an army of them. Most of them all have their own dragons. Also, the other major difference from the main show is that there are 17 living dragons during this period that we're going to meet eventually, although I think we're only going to see 6 of them during Season 1. Once we get to Season 2, we meet the other dragon seeds. Those are the other dragon riders in the Targaryen Civil War. Then we'll meet the rest of them. And they're all different sizes. Like, this is kind of a size chart to just show you how big some of them are compared to the others. And the whole thing with dragons is that they just keep growing the longer they live. So like Balerion the Black Dread was about 200 years old when he died. Viserys I, the current reigning king, was actually his last dragon rider when he died. You actually see them standing in front of his skull in a lot of the trailers. Really good size comparison. If you look at the chart here, that's why he's so much bigger than these other dragons. Like, Vhagar is the next biggest living dragon. Vhagar's still alive, and they kind of refer to her as like a B-52 type bomber, like really hard to take off in and really hard to land in. But once they're in the sky, if she gets her claws on you, you are done. So when the show begins, she is like the oldest living dragon. There are only 2 dragons in episode 1, Rhaenyra's dragon Syrax and Daemon's dragon Caraxes. As you can see, one of the other big differences is they wanted to make each dragon look as unique as possible. During the main show, Daenerys' dragons all look slightly different colors, but for the most part, they're designed to look kind of the same. They also focus a lot on the dragons' personalities, and that'll come out more in future episodes as you spend more time with the actual dragons and while they're riding them around. Just in general, the dragons themselves have personalities that are kind of like cats. Like, they're very standoffish, but they become very loyal to their riders. There'll also be some moments during the show where you'll see people try to win over dragons and become their next dragon rider, because what will happen usually is that obviously dragons will live much longer than normal humans will on the show. So when a dragon has a rider and the rider just dies either of old age or they have an accident, they'll go riderless for a little while, but eventually some other Targaryen will come along and try to become their next dragon rider, but they'll have to win them over. It won't be like an automatic thing. The main focus of the show is the Targaryen Civil War, the Dance of the Dragons. The 2 sides are called the Blacks and the Greens, with all the great houses in the realm splitting their allegiances between them. But just like they did on the main show, like, they don't immediately start with the War of the Five Kings. Like, they kind of build up to that. They're going to be building up to the actual Civil War itself, where they start fighting each other. So a lot of episode 1 is sort of setting the stage for that, explaining who the characters are, what their relationships were between all of them, and then eventually through the rest of the season, things will slowly deteriorate until we get to season 2, and I think that's probably when we'll start to see the actual fomenting of war. And even though the Dance of the Dragons is like the big thing that we're talking about on this show, there are other villains that pop up outside the Targaryen family, like Crabfeeder here is from the Triarchy in Essos. That builds up to the Battle of the Stepstones that we see in all the trailers here. So like, we will have a couple really big battle episodes that have nothing to do with the actual Targaryen Civil War. There were a lot of other conflicts going on during this period. For those of you asking about the White Walkers, there are references to White Walkers, the Night King, the Long Night during the series. But at this part of the timeline, they weren't particularly active. They were in the Lands of Always Winter. There were White Walkers up there, like, they were active. They were just more of a myth at this time that the realm wasn't really thinking about that much. But even though there's a whole bunch of new places, a whole bunch of new characters, and a bunch of great houses that you didn't see that much during the main show, the way things flowed in episode 1, it didn't feel that confusing. They didn't try to throw too much at you at once. So if you're brand new to the show, or if you have a hard time with that kind of stuff, don't worry. Even though there are a lot of characters, arguably the most important 3 characters on the show are Rhaenyra Targaryen, Alicent Hightower, and Daemon Targaryen. The series starts much earlier in the timeline, so they aren't jumping backwards and forwards all the time. They start earlier and then they'll jump forward later, I think around halfway through the episodes, and you'll get the older versions of the characters. And I think of all the main characters, only Rhaenyra and Alicent have younger actresses and older actresses both playing the character, because it's about 10 years later in the timeline, and when you pick up with the characters, they're meant to be like young girls. But like Matt Smith, for instance, is playing Daemon Targaryen in all periods of the timeline because he doesn't look that much different 10 years on. As confusing as it sounds, the way that they present it in episodes is really easy to follow, so don't worry about it. All three of them, the younger actresses and Matt Damon, did a great job so far. There is a ton of table setting that they had to do to introduce you to all the new characters in episode 1, reintroduce you to all the big locations in Westeros. Like I said, things look very familiar, but they are very different at the same time. Paddy Considine was great as Viserys Targaryen. Rhys Ifans seems like he'll be really fun as Otto Hightower. Now, he's not like a Littlefinger type of character, but there are a lot of character traits that you see in people on the House of the Dragon show that will give you the same vibe as characters from Game of Thrones. The way they're presenting it, it's not like the main show where you had Starks versus Lannisters, like really good house against kind of a bad, despicable house. On House of the Dragon, it's more like bad people doing bad things to other bad people who themselves are also doing bad things. It's almost like the later seasons of Breaking Bad in that way, just a little bit, where you have like a character that you're rooting for, but they're also kind of doing bad stuff at the same time. One of the really cool things, though, is that just the overall tone of the episode, just the look, the feel, the way that they wrote everything, made it feel a lot like the early seasons of Game of Thrones, like Game of Thrones Season 1 and Season 2, when there was way more palace intrigue, and it was more of a show about just really, really good meetings, and they had also really big WTF stuff in the background. But easily one of the most noticeable upgrades that they've made is the visual style of the show. So if you watch House of the Dragon and then you go back and you watch the first couple of episodes of Game of Thrones, it makes the original show feel more like what you would expect a traditional TV show to feel like, and the look and feel of House of the Dragon just makes it feel more like an actual movie. Like just the physical way that they actually filmed the show just got a huge upgrade. They also gave the dragons a huge upgrade too, like metaphorical and literal, because all the dragons are meant to be way bigger than the dragons during the main Game of Thrones show, but also the way that they filmed them got a huge upgrade. They used some of the same technology that they used to film The Mandalorian with those LED stages to film their dragon scenes with them flying through the air, so it looks amazing. They did have some cool dragon scenes during the later seasons of Game of Thrones, but just on House of the Dragon in general, they look way, way better. So if you think that all the dragons look cool in episode 1, it's just going to get way, way crazier and way cooler in later episodes and later seasons when we meet all the other dragon seeds. There are a couple new concepts that they introduced during this show that they only hinted at during the main show, so like the lore gets a little bit deeper in a really cool way. I'll explain what's going on with that more when the actual episodes are released publicly in a couple weeks. A lot of you asking what was going on with the intro, do they have a new theme song? I can't really get into too many spoilers or anything like that, but they did open the show with like a totally different type of intro. I don't want to talk too specifically about it, but it felt totally different from the way that they opened the original Game of Thrones show, and I don't know if they're going to do it the same way for all the episodes or if it was just a thing that they did for episode 1. A lot of you may have seen that Ramin Djawadi came back to do all the music for House of the Dragon. It sounds very familiar. There are a lot of like remixed themes from the main show. So during specific parts of the episode, you will hear very familiar sounding theme songs, but it is brand new music. They use a lot of the music to reference stuff from the main show in Game of Thrones too, like little music cues that are like directly taken from the main show. Overall, I really like the episode. I think I'm going to really like the series. I've only seen episode 1, so I can't say too much about the later episodes, but it just feels like it's going to be a really strong show, so I am really excited about that. And of course, I'll do regular episode videos like I did for the main show, bonus videos, so if you have any special requests or any big questions, just write them below in the comments. Episode 1 is finally being released this Sunday, so my full video for that will post after the episode comes out. It'll be the same schedule as the way that I posted my videos for the original series too. Everyone click here for all my House of the Dragon videos. I'll update the link with my full episode 1 video as soon as I post that this weekend, and click here for my brand new She-Hulk episode 1 video and Easter eggs. Thank you so much for watching, everyone stay safe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.